That he who blesseth himself in the earth shall bless himself in the God of truth, and he that sweareth in the earth shall swear by the God of truth, because the former troubles are forgotten, and because they are hid from thine eyes. For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former shall not be remembered, nor come into mind. But be ye glad and rejoice forever in that which I create. For behold, I create Jerusalem a rejoicing, and her people a joy. And I will rejoice in Jerusalem, and joy in my people. And the voice of weeping shall be no more heard in her, nor the voice of crying. There shall be no more thence an infant of days, nor an old man that hath not filled his days. For the child shall die 100 years old. But the sinner, being 100 years old, shall be accursed. And they shall build houses and inhabit them, and they shall plant vineyards and eat the fruit of them. They shall not build, and another inhabit. They shall not plant, and another eat. Whereas the days of a tree are the days of my people, and mine elect shall long enjoy the work of their hands. They shall not labor in vain, nor bring forth for trouble, for they are the seed of the blessed of the Lord, and their offspring with them. And it shall come to pass that before they call, I will answer, and what they are yet speaking, I will hear. The wolf and the lamb shall feed together, and the lion shall eat straw like the bullock, and dust shall be the serpent's meat. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, saith the Lord.
This is exactly what the Most High is going to do with his elect, with the nation of Israel in general. Because the nation of Israel will be a nation of superhumans on the planet Earth. And this is what's coming.
All right, Shalom. First and foremost, I would like to give all praise and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shah, Bahashem, Rakakadash. Double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples to us younger brothers, and peace and blessings and salutation to the hopeful they got there pushing his word in truth and in sincerity across the four winds in the name of Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shah. Pushing to get up out of here. Shalom to the hopeful like the believers and listeners who have came back to the obedience of the scriptures through faith in Yahweh Bashim Al Shah. All right. So continuing on in the book of 2 Samuel, we made to chapter 18 and 19. And this is when we're gonna see Absalom, be judged, for this rebellion. Okay. Absalom, caused a coup, caused a lot of division, amongst Israel. Okay, and the Lord's going to allow him to be judged, so we're getting, to, all right, the point, of the end of this chapter, towards the latter end of King David's rulership, okay, and the Lord, all right, as he promised, King David, that he will have, rebellion and a sword in his house, okay, so the Lord has been chastening, King David, for what he done, dealing with Bathsheba, all right, and Uriah. Okay, so let's go here. All right, we're gonna have another account that happened as well as we read on. So let's get to it. This is 2 Samuel 18 and 1. NLT. All right, Second Samuel 18 and 1. It says, David now mustered the men who were with him and appointed generals and captains to lead them. Okay, because remember they had to, go into the wilderness and flee, from Absalom. All right, and regroup. Okay, so now, Hushai, all right, David's advisor, he, was sent back, to be in the courts of Absalom, to counter the counsel, all right, of Ahithophel, okay, so that he, so King David could have the ups as far as information, because information is very important when it comes to war, all right, communications, what they call comms, okay, intelligence, that's a major part of war, okay, so King David, he had, certain intelligence on how Absalom was moving, so he was able to strategize, all right, and counter it in the field. Okay, so going to verse 2, it says, He sent the troops out in three groups, placing one under Joab, one under Joab's brother Abishai, the son of Zariah, and one under Itaiah, the man from Gath. The king told his troops, I'm going with you. But his men objected strongly. You must not go, they urged. If we have to turn and run, and even half of us die, it will make no difference to Absalom's troops. They will be looking only for you. You are worth 10,000 of us. All right. And it is better, all right, that you stay here in the town and send help if we need it. So his men, they begged him, like, nah, you shouldn't be out there with us. Okay. Because the whole purpose of this rebellion is for your life. And they like, look, you're worth 10,000 of us. You know, they knew that the Lord was dealing, and they knew that the blessing was flowing through Israel because of King David and his leadership. Okay, see, King David had some loyal men. This is a major example, of loyalty, constant examples of loyalty, man, throughout this whole, chapter, well, this whole book, First and Second Samuel. The relationship that Jonathan, the son of Saul, had with King David. Just major loyalty, man. Okay, which is a rarity in this world, but we have it in abundance amongst the body. The different brothers. Okay, different cities. You know, we have these things in abundance. That's why I say we're rich. Because the things that are rare in this society, we have it in abundance. And it says, you are worth 10,000 of us, and it is better that you stay here in the town and send help if we need it. Verse 4, if you think that's the best plan, I'll do it, the king answered. So he stood alongside the gate of the town, all right, as all the troops marched out in groups of hundreds, all right, and of thousands, okay? So King David, has mustered an army, out in the wilderness. Men started to flock, to his cause, okay? Because King David still, had a good name, you see, and this why the scriptures even say, let me see. Let's see what we get. Is that in Proverbs? Why did it pop up? Let's see. And let's see. They trip. Let me see. I think that might be Ecclesiastes 7. Okay, this one. I'm in the NLT. That's why it's not popping up. Okay. This is Ecclesiastes 7 and 1. It says a good reputation is more valuable than costly perfume, and the day you die is better than the day you are born. Okay, and King David, he still had a good name, and people, flocked. He had certain men, that were drawn to his cause. Okay, and they was willing to risk their lives, all right, to preserve the life of the king. Okay, because they understood, his good leadership. They knew he wasn't perfect. Okay, but they understood his good intention, his good reputation. All right, because his good outweighed the bad. Okay, and instead of you know, unlike King Saul, who had just a terrible pattern, of leadership. Okay, but King David was still known as a just, and fair man, through all his trials, you know, and that's what we have to pray that the Lord judges on our integrity, man. All right, and if we had to be judged, based by being perfect in the law, who could stand? You see, so King David still had, a solid name, all right, and a lot of men, still supported, okay, King David in Israel, all right. So going back to verse 5, it says, and the king gave this command to Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, for my sake, deal gently with young Absalom. And all the troops heard the king give this order to his commanders. So the battle began in the forest, all right, in the forest of Ephraim. And the Israelite troops were beaten back by David's men. There was a great slaughter that day, and 20,000 men laid down their lives. It was a lot of men. And the Lord wanted these certain Israelites to be judged, to go against their king like this, to betray their king, because ultimately it was treason, to lift banners, against your own king. Okay, going back to it. But this was, a lot of people, there was their opportunity, they already had to have a problem, with King David to do this, so you're seeing, like I say, adversity begin to show things that are hidden in normal times. Okay, it says, so the battle, I read that verse 8. It said the battle raged all across the countryside, and more men died because of the forest, all right, than were killed by the sword. See, and that's why King David, he went into the wilderness, man, because it's a whole nother world out there in the wilderness, man. A lot of men died, because of the wilderness. Okay, it wasn't built like that. These, probably a lot of these young guys, they rallied around Absalom. Okay, they grew up, mostly in the city, you know, in the town, and in infrastructure. You see, so they got out there to the wilderness, and they weren't built for that. And that's why King David, he went out there to the wilderness. Everybody ain't built, for that wilderness, man. So it said more men died because of the forest than were killed by the sword, man. So the Lord, set it up, for King David to go back to his roots. Okay. It says during the battle, Absalom happened to come up upon some of David's men. He tried to escape on his mule, but as he rode beneath the thick branches of a great tree, his hair, all right, all that goddamn hair, got caught in the tree. His mule kept going and left him dangling in the air. Okay. That long goddamn hair, probably that long, thick, and his ass is hanging by his hair, man. Okay, so it was set up. The Lord set him up for judgment. Okay, and all this tough guy talk, but he seen King David men and took off. All right, and got caught in that tree. Okay, it says one of David's men saw what had happened and told Joab, I saw Absalom dangling from a great tree. What? Joab demanded. You saw him there and didn't kill him? I would have rewarded you with 10 pieces of silver, and it says, and a hero's belt. So they supported Joel that they seen Absalom hanging in the tree. Joel like, you ain't kill this nigga, man. He said, I would have rewarded you, handsomely, man. Okay. You see, because Joel, is hot headed, man. He gets imposed. And when you read it, he sometimes half the time he got the king's best interest in mind. Sometimes he do his own thing a little bit. You know, so Joel, he's one of those guys that's needed. And then sometimes he can be a liability. But most of the time he's an asset. You see, he's one of them type of guys. Okay, so um, Joab, his mind is made up what he wants to do with Absalom. Okay, what I'm saying, he know like Uncle tripping right now. Being emotional for this badass nigga. So Joab like it's on me to do what got to be done. It says so his soldier replied, I would not kill the king's son for even 1,000 pieces of silver, which that's equivalent to $1 million today. It said the man replied to Joab, we all heard the king say to you and Abishai and Attiah, for my sake, please spare young Absalom. So the men were like, nah, I heard the king's order, you know. And it said, but Joab know he has a little leeway. He can do particular things that other men can't do. All right. And it says, and if I had betrayed the king by killing his son, and the king will certainly find out who did it, you yourself will be the first to abandon me. Enough of this nonsense, Joab said. Then he took 3 daggers and plunged them into Absalom's heart as he dangled, still alive, in the great tree. So Joab, yeah, he done with the back and forth. All right, and remember Absalom burnt his fields. Joab don't let nothing go. you know, this guy don't let nothing go. So he burnt them fields, them barley fields of Joab. So he can force Joab to, come talk to him. So he can get an audience with the king. Okay. So now he done, burnt Joab's barley fields. He done rebelled against the king. Got Joab and them out here in the wilderness. Okay. So when Joab see this nigga, he deals with him immediately. Okay. It says 10 of Joab's young armor bearer then surrounded Absalom and killed him. Okay. Got his ass out of there. And it said, then Joab blew the ram's horn, and his men returned from chasing the army of Israel. They threw Absalom's body into a deep pit in the forest and piled a great heap of stones over it, and all Israel fled to their homes. They threw that nigga in the pit, put stones on that guy, made him a monument, man. Okay, said during his lifetime, Absalom had built a monument to himself in King's Valley, for he said, I have no son to carry on my name. He named the monument after himself, and it is known as Absalom Monument to this day. Then Zodak's son, all right, Ahimaaz said, let me run to the king with the good news that the Lord has rescued him from his enemies. No, Joab told him, it wouldn't be good news to the king that his son is dead. You can be my messenger another time, but not today. But Joab already know King David gonna be pissed, you know. So Joab, Ahimaaz, he's younger, all right, kind of simple. All right, he doesn't know the history, because we know, all right, that men have, called themselves, going to tell, King David good news, and they don't come back. Okay, what they think is good news, and Joab know, how, King David, felt about Absalom. So he telling Ahimaaz like, look, nah, you don't want to go do that. You don't want to go tell the king that. Okay, because that could have been Ahimaaz's last scene. Okay, so going here to verse 21, it said, then Joab said to a man from Ethiopia, go tell the king what you have seen. That man, it said the man bowed and ran off. But Ahimaaz continued to plead to Joab, whatever happens, please let me go too. Why should you go, my son? Joab replied, there will be no reward for your news. So Joab's, trying to tell him. It says, yes, but let me go anyway. He begged. Joab finally said, "All right, go ahead." So Ahimaaz took, all right, the less demanding route by the way of the plain and ran to Mahanaim, ahead of the Ethiopian. So Joab pretty much sent the Ethiopian on the crash mission. Because he knew like King David might kill these guys, man. You know, it says, while David was sitting between the inner and outer gates of the town, the watchman climbed to the roof of the gateway by the wall, and he looked and he saw a lone man running toward them. He shouted the news down to David, and the king replied, "If he is alone, he has news." As the messenger came closer, the watchman saw another man running toward them. He shouted down, "Here comes another one." The king replied, "He also will have news." The first man runs like Ahimaaz, son of Zodek. The watchman said, "He is a good man and comes with good news." The king replied, You know, Jake knew how he ran. How certain Jakes walk. You see them, or you know who that is by their walk. They just show you that these are just these Jakes, man. It's us, man. You know, and said then Ahimaaz cried out to the king, "Everything is all right." He bowed before the king with his face to the ground and said, "Praise to the Lord Yahweh Bashem Al Shai, your power, who has handed over the rebels who dared to stand against my lord the king. What about young Absalom?" The king demanded. "Is he all right?" Ahimaaz replied, "When Joab told me to come, there was a lot of commotion, but I didn't know what was happening. Wait here," the king told him. So Ahimaaz stepped aside. Then the man from Ethiopia arrived and said, "I have good news for you, my lord the king. Today the Lord has rescued you from all those who rebelled against you." "What about Absalom?" the king demanded. "Is he all right?" And Ethiopia replied, "May all your enemies, my lord the king, both now and in the future, share the fate of that young man." Okay, so he's letting them know that he's out of there. Then the king was overcome with emotion. He went up to the room over the gateway and burst into tears. And as he went, he cried, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son." So King David, he's full of emotion. That's his son. And he's knowing why, because this is the Lord continuing, chastening King David as well, because he knows that his son rebelled based on something that he did, you know, because this was all going back, to 2 Samuel 12 chapter when Nathan, told him that, his house was going to rebel against him and the sword was going to be in his house, So the rebellion and the sword, has been a theme, within King David's household. Okay. And then on the flip side, Absalom, when the Lord wanted to judge that nigga anyway, so why he chose Absalom to rebel. Okay, because King David had, other sons, but he chose Absalom to rebel. So it was something in Absalom, you know. Um, so now we made the chapter 19. Okay, let's read down on this. Yep, this one I'm looking forward to. The water, bro. It's brother Damawati to your mess in his likeness. Proverbs 22:1 says, "A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and love and favor rather than silver and gold." Because even though the Lord, is chastising David, he's not forsaken. Matter of fact, let's get there real quick. Because he still had a good name, amongst his people. Even though he, did what he did. And then he always showed character, in the worst situations. All right. He didn't spiral out of control after he did what he did. He stayed true, to who he always has been, fearing the Lord, being just and fair amongst his people. Okay. So what I finna go to? Oh yeah. I think that's First Corinthians 4th chapter. Let me Second Corinthians. right, this is 2 Corinthians 4 and 8. It says, we are pressed on every side by troubles, but we are not crushed. Okay? We are perplexed, but not driven to despair. All right? And we're seeing, these things, all right, happening to King David as he had troubles, but he's not crushed. You know, he's perplexed, but he's not driven to despair. It says, we are hunted down, but never abandoned by the Most High. We get knocked down, but we are not destroyed. Okay? So we have to take on this mind that, like scripture say, through much tribulation shall we enter into the kingdom of heaven. So it just as the Lord, brings us, because the Lord can put us in the press sometime, man. You can feel that pressure. You can be in situations where you just feel that pressure on every side, but we're not crushed. You know, we be perplexed. Things can get kind of perplexed in our situation, but we're not in despair. The Lord ain't got us out here just bad and finished. Okay, we're not done out here, man. Okay, the Lord comes through. He pushes us to the limit. He comes through. He pushes us to the limit, and he comes through. And they're just constantly training us to go through Jacob's trouble, man. What we going through now, these troubles and these little things that we go through now are our preparation, to trust, okay, and not to panic and not to, be in despair in the times of Jacob's trouble, man. It's going to take a particular, mental fortitude, okay, and the Lord is constantly, chastening us and preparing our minds for what, all right, we got to go through, man, in these times, all right, through that suffering. Okay, verse 10, it says, through suffering, our bodies continue to share in the death of Yahushua. Yahushua was an example of suffering, man. He had to suffer, the niggas trying to trip him up, and, these sellout niggas, just like today, man. All these crazy doctrines that niggas come with, these gimmicks and games that niggas play, man. Yahushua had to suffer these clowns as well, man. Okay, he had to suffer the cross, man, the torment. So we all got our suffering, that we're gonna have to endure. Okay, but we're not forsaken. Okay, he says, so that the life of Yahushua may also be seen in our bodies, man. And we're a constant example of Yahushua suffering. You know, we are, an example of that continuation of the suffering of Yahushua. We're drinking of that cup. You see, right now, this is King David, drinking of his cup of adversity, man. Because everybody got their cup of adversity. Everybody got their cup of prosperity. And King David, the scripture say, who much is given, much is required. So there's a different suffering required for different men. Okay? Verse 12, it says, so we live in the face of death, but this has resulted in eternal life, all right, for you. Okay? We read this, I think I jumped verse 11, said, yes, we live under constant danger of death because we serve Yahushua, so that the life of Yahushua may be evident in our dying bodies, man. So the resistance we get from this world is due to us serving Yahushua. And there's always, people trying to plot and scheme. There's always, some element of danger. Certain brothers, they have even been attacked. So we have to understand that we're all right behind enemy line, but we're not forsaken. Okay, so let's go back to um 2 Samuel 19:1. It said, word soon reached Joab that the king was weeping and mourning for Absalom. As all the people heard of the king deep grief for his son, the joy of that day's victory was turned into deep sadness. And it's so now, the people, because they have a strong connection with King David, his men, so they feel what he feel. Okay. It says they crept back into the town that day as though they were ashamed and had deserted in battle. The king covered his face with his hands and kept on crying, oh, my son Absalom, Absalom, my son, my son. Then Joab went to the king's room and said to him, "We save your life today and the lives of your sons and your daughters and your wives and concubines, yet you act like this, making us feel ashamed of ourselves." So Joab, he's coming to straighten, he's coming, tell, King David, like, look, you tripping. Your son dead, that wicked nigga dead. Okay. And you're mourning, but then you going too far. You act like lies wasn't saved. You crying about this one nigga, you know, who was against everything, man. He was willing to kill you, your family, you know. So Joab, he's in the right spirit, I said Joab is that super, straightforward friend that you need sometimes, you know. And it says, "You seem to love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You have made it clear today that your commanders and troops mean nothing to you. It seems that if Absalom had lived and all of us had died, you would be pleased, you know." So Joab like, God damn. I would Joel like one so shit if because Joel had a smart mouth, man. He knew how to make particular points. So he like, if all of us were dead, and then Absalom lived, would you be pleased then? You see? So it says it said, now go out there and congratulate your troops, because at the end of the day, you know, um, especially as a king, your reaction to things has a ripple effect, you know. So that's why, you have certain sayings, no emotions for a king. Okay. There's certain things that you have to do in privacy, because it can have a ripple effect, on your men, on your people, you know. So, Joab, he went in and he had to get, King David together. He had this, his emotional, breakdown by his son. It says, "Now go out there and congratulate your troops, for I swear by the Lord that if you don't go out, not a single one of them will remain here tonight. Then you will be worse off, all right, than ever before." So he like can't disregard, these men, that have, sacrificed their life on your behalf, and they've won the victory. All right, when you're stuck in this, this stupor. Okay, look, you gotta shake that off, man. You know, niggas die every day, b. You see, this is verse 8 says, "So the king went out and took his seat at the town gate, and as the news spread throughout the town that he was there, everyone went to him. Meanwhile, the Israelites who had supported Absalom fled to their homes, and throughout all the tribes of Israel, there was much discussion and argument going on. The people were saying, 'The king rescued us from our enemies and saved us from the Philistine, but Absalom chased him out of the country.'" So Jake, they like, well, Absalom had King David running, like he rescued us from the Philistines, King David, but Absalom had him running like as if Absalom, was some great mighty man, above King David. All right. And Absalom didn't bust a grape during the whole war. He didn't put his hands on no goddamn body. Okay. And it says, now Absalom, whom we anointed to rule over us, is dead. Why not ask David to come back to be our king again? So Jake, Jake with their arguments and discussions and debates, okay, not understanding the spectrum of what's going on. And it said, "Then King David sent Zadok and Abiathar the priests to say to the elders of Judah, 'Why are you the last ones to welcome back the king into his palace? For I have heard that all Israel is ready. You are my relatives, my own tribe, my own flesh and blood. So why are you the last ones to welcome back, all right, the king?' And David told them to tell Amasa, 'Since you are my own flesh and blood, like Joab, may the Most High strike me and even kill me if I don't appoint you as commander of my army, all right, in his place.'" Now Amasa was a general, okay, for Absalom's troops. Okay, so King David, he wants to reconcile, all his kinsmen. Now he's all about, the reconciliation. Because remember, King David is still living with the fact that his sin is causing all this, so he can't just wild out, because he still has this on his conscience, so he's moving in a particular way. You always have to factor that in, as well. It said, then Amasa convinced all the men of Judah, and they responded unanimously. Unanimously, they sent word to the king, return to us and bring back all who are with you. All right. And it goes into David, coming back, into Jerusalem. Okay. It says, so the king started back to Jerusalem. And when he arrived at the Jordan River, the people of Judah came to Gilgal to meet him and escort him across the river. Shimei, son of Gerah, the man from Benjamin, all right, from Baharim, all right, in Benjamin, hurried across with the men of Judah to welcome King David. 1,000 other men from the tribe of Benjamin were with him, including Zabah, the chief servant of the house of Saul, and Zabah's 15 sons and 20 servants. They rushed down to the Jordan, all right, to the Jordan to meet the king. Okay, so you got Benjamin, okay, Zabah, all right, he's got Shemi, all right, Shimei, okay, and they ain't right neither. It's gonna go into them. All right, so if they cross, because it's a lot of moving parts. That's why, like, you watch the Game of Thrones, a lot of moving parts. Everybody trying to get favor from the king, people trying to replace the king, people trying to make their own king. People got all their different personal interests, involved in this thing. Okay, and scriptures speak about that in the book of Sirach. I forgot how it's worded. Let's see if I can find it real quick. Read down first. Yeah, I think we'll get that. All right. It says they cross, all right, the shallows. Um, yeah, verse 18 says, they crossed the shallows of the Jordan to bring the king's household across the river, helping him in every way they could. As the king was about to cross the river, Shemaiah fell down before him. My lord, the king, please forgive me, he pleaded. Forget the terrible thing your servant did when you left Jerusalem. May the king put it out of his mind. So you had this guy, Shemaiah, all right, which was a relative of Saul, and he, was the one throwing stones and cursing King David as he was on the way out, as he was on the run from Absalom. Okay, but now King David is back, in his power. You see, he done flipped the script. Now he's begging for forgiveness, because they had counted King David out. You see, a lot of Israelites, they counted King David out. They thought he was finished. All right, because it don't take much for Jake to jump ship. Okay, so now he's begging, for mercy. All right, and it says, I know how much I sinned. That is why I come here today. The very first person in all Israel to greet my Lord the King, this nigga, man. All right, and the very first person. Now he's using flattery. Okay, and remember he was throwing stones and cursing, following King David into the wilderness, man. Okay. It says, then Absalom, son of Zariah, said, Shemai should die, for he cursed the Lord's anointed king. You remember Abishai is Joab's younger brother, so he like, look, let's put this nigga to death, you know. You see? But King David gonna have mercy. King David was a merciful man. All right. Um, verse 22, it says, who asked your opinion, you sons of Zariah? David explained, why have you became my adversary today? This is not a day for execution, but for celebration. Today, I am once again the king of Israel. So King David, held him back. So Um, it said, then turning to Shemaiah, David vowed, your life will be spared. You know, we're gonna read about this guy later on when we get to Kings. You know, and the thing about it, if you ain't right, you know, you don't get away. Okay, you can act, you can put on, all right, but if you ain't right, you don't get away. Okay, so let's go here. I want to get this real quick because like I said the virtually just showed a lot. You know, you see different characters flip. You know, I say when King David looked like he was through. You know, men began to show their true colors and began to flip and began to come out the woodworks, and loyalty was shown too. Okay, so that's why the hour of temptation needed. You know, like I said, during Joab's affliction, his wife was exposed. Okay, when Lot had to flee, his possessions in Sodom and Gomorrah, his wife was exposed. Okay, so adversity, all right, is going to expose everything, that prosperity hides, man. Okay, and that's why you go here. The scriptures put us on game. All right, when you go to what this is, it says this is on Sirach 6 and 8. It said, for some men, okay, is a friend for his own occasion. Okay, and a lot of people want to be around the king for their own interests. You know, they have their own personal interests and not sincerely to serve the king, but it's for their own interests, man. All right. It says, and will not abide in the day of thy trouble. Okay. So when King David went into his trouble, you see a lot of men flip. Okay. And it says, and there is a friend who being turned to enmity and strife will discover thy reproach. Again, some friend is a companion at the table and will not continue in the day of thy affliction. Okay? So you have these people, as long as King David table is full of wine, all right, rich meats, okay, the fruits, the produce, okay, as long as King David's table was full, the wine pouring, all right, plenty companions, they speak well of you. But when David came into his trouble, when King David came into his trouble, you started to see, they tried to treat him like a peasant, man. And there was the Lord chastening him, and King David, he weathered the storm. He dealt with integrity, mercy, you know, and he weathered the storm. He left a lot of judgment up to the Lord. Okay, so um, um verse 11 it says, but in thy prosperity he will be as thyself and will be bold over thy servants. Yeah, so when you're in your prosperity, people come around and they enjoy your things better than you. You know, you see, they make themselves equal to you in your house. Okay, and it says, if thou be brought low, he will be against thee and will hide himself from thy face, man. Okay, you see. So this is a great example. All right, as we're reading King David, hey, this Jacob's trouble. Remember, we're gonna be brought low. Okay, someone's gonna be homeless. All right, carless. Okay, not gonna have a pot to piss in, man. You see, but we're gonna have our power. You see, and our faith. You know, and we're gonna be fully dependent on Yahweh Shema Shai. Okay, so to the world, it's gonna look like we've been brought low. Okay, and anyone that was against us, it's gonna show in that time. They're not gonna be able to pretend like they with you in adversity, man. Okay, there's very few people that's willing to be homeless with you. Very few people. Okay, and it's gonna be shown. All right, in these times to come. And it says, separate thyself from thy enemies and take heed of thy friends. Okay, and this is why we move. And we in the time now to be as stealth as possible, man. It's in the time to be all in the mix, to be an open book. We in the time to be in stealth mode, man. And always keep receipts. keep mental receipts of things. When certain things happen and you see certain reactions, shit, take note of it. Okay. Hey, benefit of the doubt. Nah, that hey, we passed the benefit of the doubt. Shit, take note of everything. You know. Hey, so hey, the Lord telling us something, man. You know, the receipts paint a picture. Okay, so let's go back to Second Samuel um, 23. It says, then turning to Shemaiah, David vowed, your life will be spared. Now, Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, came down from Jerusalem to meet the king. He had not cared, all right, he had not cared for his feet, trimmed his beard, or washed his clothes since the day the king left Jerusalem. So he was in a state of mourning. It said, why didn't you come with me, Mephibosheth? The king asked him. Mephibosheth replied, my lord the king, my servant Ziba deceived me. I told him, saddle my donkey so I can go with the king, for as you know, I am crippled. Ziba had slandered me by saying that I refused to come, but I know that my lord the king is like an angel of the Most High, so do what you think is best. So Ziba, he pretty much took this opportunity to slander Mephibosheth, because remember he was a steward over Mephibosheth's estates. Okay, and as you can see, as Ziba was able to give, King David and his men, that abundance, and victuals, that land was extremely productive. Okay, so Ziba, he took this opportunity to make a move, for his own, ambition, okay, of getting those estates. Okay, so to be lord over those estates. So he took this chance to slander Mephibosheth, all right, to King David. Okay, so Mephibosheth, he comes to King David and let him know, what happened, but then I said he's been in a state of mourning until King David returned. It says, all my relatives, and all right, and I could expect only death from you, my Lord, but instead you have honored me by allowing me to eat at your own table. What more can I ask? He says, you said enough. David replied, I've decided that you and Ziba will divide your land equally between you. All right, now listen to Mephibosheth. All right, listen to his response. It says, give him all of it. All right, Mephibosheth said, I am content just to have you safely back again, my lord the king. Okay, solid, because when I read um chapter 17, and when Ziba, said that Mephibosheth, you know, he took this opportunity to try to, get the throne, you know, I was like, nah, not my man's, And then I said, that's not like his character, man. So I had to keep reading on a couple more chapters, and then I was like, oh, okay, that sound about right, you know. But yeah, man, he was solid, man. King David, like, look, we just gonna split the land between y'all two, because King David know that it was Zabah's greed, that caused him to do that. So he like, look, we just gonna split the land evenly between y'all. And Mephibosheth was like, look, he can have it, man. I'm not gonna argue with that nigga about that, man. As long as you back, because Mephibosheth he ate at the king's table anyway, you know. So he was good. He had the mindset like, look, I'm not even gonna get into the politics and argue with this nigga. He can have it. He can do his thing. All right, I'm gonna just eat, at the king's table as long as you back safely. I'm good. You know. So Mephibosheth was a real one. As they say. Okay, he was solid. You know, his only intent was, the safety of the king. All right, and that's why even when you go here to and this is how you read about certain men and certain women in the Bible. Hey, this is how you measure up people, okay, that you deal with, man. You measure them up to these accounts, okay. See, the scriptures give us a standard. You read these stories and these accounts, and you see how solid, you know, a lot of our forefathers were, and even some of our foremothers, man. You see how solid they were. Like, that's how you should measure up people, man. Okay, according to these accounts, man, we have a lot of examples, okay, of having some thorough forefathers, and even some thorough foremothers, man. Like you see them, like, okay, this, what I'm saying, this is it. You see, so you go here. All right, and this is the mindset that Mephi Pashat had when you go to I think it's First Timothy. Hmm. 1 Timothy 6. All right, 1 Timothy chapter 6. Yeah, this is First Timothy 6:6. It said, "Yeah, true godliness with contentment is great, is itself great wealth. After all, we brought nothing with us, all right, when we came into this world, and we can take nothing, all right, and we can't take anything with us when we leave it. So if we have enough food and clothing, let us be content." Okay, and this is the mindset of Mephi Basheth. Okay, he had this mindset like, look, I eat at the king's table, I'm good. You back in safety. Israel good, I'm good, I'm content. So he had godliness with contentment. Okay, but his spirit was wealthy, man. Because there's value. That loyalty is extremely rare and valuable, man. Okay, verse 9 it says, "But people who long to be rich fall into temptation or are trapped by many foolish and harmful desires that plunge them into ruin and destruction, man." And a guy like Ziba, which it doesn't go into, how he ended, but this was a guy who longed to be rich. Okay, so there's no telling what he fell into. There's no telling how, because the Lord is going to judge. The Lord going to judge their cause, man. He smeared, the name of someone that was righteous, man. Okay, he attempted to, but the Lord allowed it to be, mended. So going back into 2 Samuel 19, all right, um, verse 31. All right, it now says, Barzillai of Gilead had come down from Rogalim to escort the king across the Jordan. He was very old, about 80, and very wealthy. He was the one who had provided food for the king during his stay at Mahanaim. So you had wealthy men from these wealthy houses, that was providing for King David. And it says, "Come across with me and live in Jerusalem." The king said to Barzillai, "I will take care of you there." And it says, "No," he replied, I am too I am far too old to go with the king to Jerusalem." Okay? So this man, he wasn't concerned about status and clout, and being known as a friend of the king and all around the king and in the entourage. He like, "No, I'm good. I'm just coming to see you across, you know, and then I'm out of here, you know." And it said, "I am 80 years old today, and I can no longer enjoy anything." Food and wine are no longer tasty, and I cannot hear the singers as they sing. I would only be a burden to my lord the king. So he's up in age, and he like, "Look, I'm good. So I'm ready to get out of here anyway. I'm ready to check out." It said, "Just to go across the Jordan River with the king is all the honor I need." Solid. So now you're seeing, the betrayal, the shystiness, and then you're seeing the people that, are solid, and it's all going to be shown in adversity, man. I can't say it enough. It said, "Then let me return again to die in my own town where my father and mother are buried. But here is your servant, my son Kahim, all right, Kim Hum, let him go with my lord the king and receive whatever you want to give him. Okay, so he like, look, just take my son, whatever you gonna give me, just give it, to him. It says, good. The king agreed. Kim Heen will go with me, and I will help him in any way you would like, and I will do for you anything you want. So all the people crossed the Jordan with the king after David had blessed Barzillai and kissed him. Barzillai returned to his own home. The king, all right, then crossed over Gilgal, taking King Hum with him. All the troops of Judah and half the troops of Israel escorted the king on his way. But all the men of Israel complained to the king. The men of Judah stole the king and didn't give us honor of helping take you, all right, your household and all your men across the Jordan. He arguing, he come Jacob with some petty argument, you know. Then the men of Judah replied, the king is one of our own kinsmen. Why should this make you angry? We haven't eaten we haven't eaten any of the king's food or received any special favors, but there are 10 tribes in Israel, the others replied. So we have 10 times as much right to the king as you do. What right do you have to treat us with such contempt? Weren't we the first to speak of bringing him back to be our king again? The argument continued back and forth, and the men of Judah spoke even more harshly, all right, um, than the men of Israel. So you had this argument, and we're going to see where the root of that argument is coming from, because all it takes is one nigga to start a rebellion. So when we go into the next chapter, we're going to go into the root of this little debate, all right, and that's going to be, snuffed out, So, um, yeah, that's the point in that. Just want to go into that this morning. All right. So Lord will, you brothers, all right, and you sisters edified once again. And give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Kakwadash, and double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples for his younger brothers. And peace and blessing salutation to the hopeful Shalom.